Fatima's voice trembled as she clutched her phone, pacing the marble floor of Amara's apartment. "She's not moving. Please, send help." Her words spilled out in frantic bursts, her breath catching between sobs. The operator's calm reassurances barely registered as Fatima glanced toward Amara, lying motionless near the staircase, her lifeless form surrounded by shattered glass. Amara's apartment, usually pristine, was now a chaotic scene. The extravagant gold accents and designer furniture were overshadowed by disarray. A toppled vase, a torn silk scarf, and smears of blood on the glossy floor. The room carried an eerie stillness, the once vibrant space now steeped in dread. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the hall as officers entered. One detective, a stoic man with sharp eyes, surveyed the room. "Bag the glass," he ordered, gesturing toward the shards near the stairs. A young officer muttered under his breath, "Doesn't look like an accident to me." His colleague shot him a warning look, but the seeds of suspicion had been planted. The murmurs among the officers grew louder as a name emerged. Khalid Al-Farouq. Fatima, visibly distraught, had mentioned him during questioning. "He was with him last night," she confessed, her hands shaking. "They argued. I told her he was in trouble." Khalid's name, tied to wealth and influence, sent a ripple of intrigue through the investigation team. Khalid Al-Farouq was the epitome of success. His face graced magazine covers. His name was synonymous with real estate empires. To the public, he was a devoted family man, married to the glamorous Laila Al-Farouq, with whom he shared a gilded life. But beneath the surface lay a man driven by control, his charm masking the lies and manipulation that defined his private world. Dubai's skyline sparkled in the distance, a testament to opulence and ambition. Yet, beyond the towering glass structures and luxury yachts lay a darker underbelly, dimly lit alleys and whispered secrets that thrived in the shadows. Amara had straddled both worlds, the aspiring influencer drawn to glittering excess and the lonely expat grappling with isolation. Her journey had led her into Khalid's orbit, a collision of desire and danger. As investigators pieced together the fragments of Amara's final hours, Khalid's perfect image began to fracture. Witnesses came forward, recounting whispered arguments at high-pressure events and stolen glances that hinted at a forbidden romance. Lalil, Khalid's wife, maintained a dignified silence publicly, but her icy glares at society gatherings betrayed her fury. Rumors spread rapidly. Amara's name became the centerpiece of scandal, and Khalid's carefully constructed life teetered on the edge of collapse. Amara Hassan was a 23-year-old Nigerian expat who arrived in Dubai with lofty dreams of becoming a fashion influencer. Driven by her passion and ambition, she spent her days juggling odd jobs to make ends meet, while curating an online presence that she hoped would catapult her to stardom. The glitz and glamour of Dubai inspired her, but the city's expensive lifestyle weighed heavily on her limited resources. Moha Sawanyuya, she often found herself second-guessing her decisions, wondering if she was chasing a dream that would never come true. Societal expectations from back home, coupled with her personal insecurities, pushed her to work harder. Amara longed for recognition, but felt isolated in a city that thrived on connections she didn't have. Amara's personal life mirrored her struggles. Past heartbreaks had left her deeply scarred, making it difficult for her to trust anyone. She'd been burned before by people who only saw her as a stepping stone, and those experiences created a fortress around her heart. Despite her reluctance to open up, she craved connection. Loneliness became a constant companion, whispering doubts into her ears during quiet nights. The conflict between her fear of vulnerability and her need for emotional closeness weighed on her, creating a fragile existence where every decision felt like a gamble. Khalid Al-Farouq was the embodiment of power and charm. At 42, he was a real estate mogul with an empire that stretched across Dubai's gleaming skyline. To the outside world, he was a charismatic businessman, a philanthropist who graced the covers of magazines and moved effortlessly through elite social circles. But behind the polished exterior lay a man obsessed with control. Married to Layala, A beautiful and influential socialite, Khalid's personal life was a stark contrast to his public image. His charm, while captivating, was a tool he wielded with precision, bending people to his will and ensuring that he always remained untouchable. Amara first encountered Khalid at an opulent charity gala held at one of Dubai's most exclusive venues. She had been invited as a +1 by a friend, nervous yet excited to brush shoulders with the city's elite. Khalid noticed her almost immediately. Amidst the crowd of designer-clad guests, her quiet elegance and unfamiliar face intrigued him. He approached her with effortless ease, complimenting her style and offering her a glass of champagne. Their conversation flowed naturally, with Khalid making her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. His attentiveness disarmed her, and despite the whispers of doubt in her mind, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. For Amara, Khalid represented the stability and admiration she had been searching for, though the glaring red flags were hard to ignore. As the relationship progressed, it became clear that Khalid was a man who valued discretion above all else. He insisted that their meetings remain private, explaining that his high private status demanded secrecy. Amara, eager to hold on to the connection, reluctantly agreed to his terms. It didn't take long for Khalid's influence to extend beyond their private moments. He began to subtly manipulate her life, suggesting which events she should attend, what projects she should pursue, and which friendships she should avoid. At first, his advice seemed caring, but it soon became clear that he was isolating her from her support system. Amara found herself making excuses for his behavior, convincing herself that his actions were a reflection of his affection. But deep down, she began to feel trapped in a web of deceit, with Khalid pulling the strings. While Khalid was meticulous in hiding his double life, Amara Al-Farouq was no stranger to his games. As a socialite accustomed to the whispers of high society, she had grown suspicious of his late-night absences and secretive phone calls. Lailal, with her connections and resources, quietly began to investigate. She was a woman scorned, and her instincts told her that Khalid's polished image was crumbling. While she maintained her composure publicly, privately, she prepared herself for the storm that was brewing, determined to uncover the truth and protect her status at any cost. Amara sat in the back seat of Khalid's chauffeur-driven car, her fingers grazing the soft leather interior as the city lights of Dubai blurred past. Every time they met, Khalid ensured it was in places far removed from the prying eyes of the public. A villa tucked away in the desert, a private yacht gliding over dark waters, or the penthouse of a 5-star hotel. The luxury of it all dazzled her, but it was always accompanied by an overwhelming sense of isolation. "You're safe here," Khalid assured her as they stepped into the villa that evening. His hand lingered on the small of her back, a gesture meant to comfort, but one that felt possessive. Amara smiled faintly, brushing away the unease creeping into her mind. Yet, even as she admired the glittering chandeliers and marble floors, she couldn't shake the feeling that the secrecy of their meetings wasn't just to protect his reputation. It was to keep her hidden, out of sight and out of mind. Khalid's charm was undeniable. He had a way of making Amara feel like she was the only woman in the world when they were together. He showered her with gifts, designer handbags, diamond jewelry, and weekends in Paris. His words were intoxicating, weaving dreams of a future that seemed almost too perfect to be true. But cracks began to form. "Why don't you ever answer your phone when I call during the day?" Amara asked one evening, her voice laced with curiosity rather than accusation. Khalid's expression hardened for a brief moment before his smile returned. "I'm busy, Habibi. My business demands my attention." Jaoul Benadaleh. The explanation was reasonable, but Amara couldn't ignore the small inconsistencies, like how he'd once told her he was at a meeting, only for her to see a photo of him on social media at a gala with Layla. Still, the affection he lavished on her dulled her doubts. She told herself she was overthinking, clinging to his words when he whispered, "You mean more to me than anyone else." Layla had spent years mastering the art of appearances. To the world, she was the epitome of grace and sophistication, the wife of one of Dubai's most powerful men. But beneath the polished exterior was a woman who knew when something was amiss. Khalid's late-night absences and cryptic phone calls had become too frequent to ignore. Business, he always claimed, his excuses smooth but increasingly hollow. One evening, Layla sat in her study, staring at a file the private investigator had delivered earlier that day. Inside were photos of Khalid, walking into a villa with a young woman who wasn't her. Layla's lips tightened as she closed the file. She wasn't just furious, she was calculating. This wasn't about heartbreak. It was about preserving her position and dismantling Khalid's carefully curated world, piece by piece. Amara sat on her bed, scrolling through old photos of herself. There was a time when she felt unstoppable, determined to build a career in fashion and prove to herself and everyone back home that she could succeed. Now, those dreams felt distant, almost like they belonged to someone else. "Do you ever feel like you've lost yourself?" she asked Fatima one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. Fatima glanced up from her laptop, her brow furrowed with concern. "Amara, what's going on? You haven't been yourself for months." Amara hesitated, debating how much to share. "It's complicated," she finally said, avoiding Fatima's probing gaze. But as the days passed, the weight of her doubts grew heavier. Khalid had promised her the world, but all she had was secrecy and loneliness. Fatima wasn't one to meddle, but she couldn't stay silent anymore. One evening, as Amara prepared for yet another late-night rendezvous with Khalid, Fatima stopped her at the door. "Amara, wait." Amara froze, her hand on the doorknob. "What is it, Fatima?" Fatima stepped closer, her voice firm but tinged with worry. "This isn't right. He's married, Amara, and in a place like this—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely to the apartment around them. "Know how dangerous this could be if people find out." Amara sighed, her shoulders slumping. "You don't understand, Fatima. He cares about me." Fatima's expression softened, but her tone remained resolute. "Maybe he does, but at what cost? You're giving up everything for a man who'll never give you the life you deserve." Amara didn't respond, but Fatima's words lingered long after she left. Khalid's grip on Amara tightened as their relationship progressed. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked one night, his voice low and persuasive. "Of course," Amara replied, though her heart hesitated. "Then you'll understand why it's better if we keep things just between us. People won't understand what we have, and I don't want anyone ruining this." His words felt like a warning, and Amara nodded, too afraid to push back. She stopped confiding in Fatima and distanced herself from the few friends she had left. Khalid became her world, even as the walls around her began to close in. Amara stared at the email on her laptop screen, a modeling opportunity she had dreamed of for months, but before she could even consider responding, Khalid's voice echoed in her mind. "Yes, mi hawa neighbor? Yeah. Why do you need those gigs when I can take care of you? Focus on us, Amara. That's all that matters." She deleted the email without replying, her chest tightening as she closed her laptop. Her dreams, once so vivid, now felt like shadows she couldn't grasp. With each passing day, Amara felt herself slipping further away from the person she used to be. She had given everything to Khalid, her time, her ambition, her identity, and yet, deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging voice that whispered, "What happens when he decides you're no longer enough?" Amara barely had time to process the sharp, insistent knock on her apartment door before it swung open. Amara Al-Farouq stood in the doorway, a storm of fury cloaked in an expensive silk abaya. Her kohl-lined eyes locked onto Amara, who froze in the middle of the living room, a glass of water trembling in her hand. "So, it's true," Layla hissed, her voice like ice cracking beneath fire. She stepped into the room, the door slamming shut behind her. "I had to see for myself the woman who thought she could take what isn't hers." Amara's breath hitched. "Layla, Don't speak," Layla snapped, her voice rising. She brandished her phone, displaying the damning evidence, explicit photos, a string of text messages, and Khalid's sweet nothings laid bare. "I trusted him. And you? What are you, some naive little girl hoping to become the next Mrs. Al-Farouq? The words cut deep, but Amara held her ground, though her voice trembled. I didn't mean for this to happen. Khalid told me... Khalid told you lies, Layla interrupted, her tone dripping with contempt. He's been doing it for years. And you believed him. Amara's fingers clenched around the glass as shame and anger twisted inside her. The room crackled with tension as the two women stood facing each other. You don't understand, Amara said, her voice breaking. He told me you didn't love him anymore, that your marriage was just for appearances. Layla laughed bitterly. And you thought that justified sneaking around with a married man? Do you even know the damage you've caused? The shame? The betrayal? Amara took a step forward, desperation leaking into her words. I love him. I didn't plan for this, but I love him. And he... Love? Layla spat. Her voice grew louder with each word. You think this is love? Khalid is a master manipulator. You're just another plaything, Amara. And when he's done with you, he'll discard you like the others. Amara's chest heaved with the weight of Layla's accusations. You don't know what we've been through. You don't know what he's told me. I know exactly what he's told you, Layla retorted, stepping closer. Her eyes blazed with rage. Because he's told me the same things, and while you were busy falling for his lies, I've been cleaning up his messes. But this is the last straw. The apartment door burst open, and Khalid strode in, his normally composed demeanor marred by visible tension. What is going on here? He demanded, his voice a low growl as he looked between the two women. Khalid? Layla said, turning toward him, her fury undiminished. How dare you? How dare you drag me into this shameful circus and humiliate me like this? Lael, calm down, Khalid said, his voice smooth, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. He stepped toward her, raising his hands in a placating gesture. This isn't what you think. Don't you dare try to manipulate me, Lael snapped. I've seen everything. I've seen enough. Amara looked at Khalid, her face pale and stricken. You said this wouldn't happen. You said you'd handle everything. Amara, I need you to stay quiet for a moment, Khalid said sharply before softening his tone. Let me handle this. You're not handling anything, Layla interjected, her voice cracked with the weight of her betrayal. Your lies, your deceit, they've ruined everything. The room felt like a powder keg, and it didn't take long for the inevitable explosion. Prus held. Layla, overcome with rage, stepped toward Khalid, jabbing a finger at his chest. You've destroyed us. You've destroyed me. How could you? Khalid grabbed her wrist, his voice now tinged with desperation. Layla, stop this. You're overreacting. Amara, shaking, tried to intervene. Please, stop. This isn't helping. Layla turned on her. You stay out of this. In the chaos, Khalid reached for Amara, his grip firm on her arm. We need to leave. Now. Let me go, Amara cried, struggling against him. The struggle shifted toward the staircase near the living room. Layla grabbed Khalid's shoulder, attempting to pull him away from Amara. In the confusion, Amara lost her balance. Her heels slipped against the edge of the step, and with a sharp cry, she tumbled backward, down the staircase. The sickening sound of her body hitting the floor was followed by a deafening silence. Khalid froze for a moment, his breath caught in his throat as he stared at Amara's motionless form at the bottom of the stairs. No, he muttered, descending the steps quickly. He crouched beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. She was alive, but barely. Call an ambulance, Layla yelled, panic replacing her fury. Khalid didn't move. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. Bring the car around, he said tersely. We have a situation. What are you doing? Layla demanded. She needs a doctor. Khalid stood, his face a mask of cold determination. This stays between us. No police, no media, do you understand? You're insane, Layla whispered, horrified. Padma returned home to find the door ajar. Her stomach churned with unease as she stepped inside. The first thing she saw was the blood on the floor near the staircase. Then her eyes landed on Amara, unconscious and pale, with Khalid and Lila standing over her. "What happened?" Fatma screamed, rushing to Amara's side. "She fell," Khalid said smoothly, but his calmness only made Fatima more suspicious. Ignoring him, Fatma pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." "No, you're not," Khalid said, his tone hard. Fatma glared at him, her hands shaking. "Try and stop me." By the time the police arrived, Khalid's carefully constructed lies began to crumble. Fatma's testimony painted a clear picture of the chaos she'd walked into, while Laila's shaken demeanor made her a reluctant accomplice in unraveling Khalid's manipulations. Detectives pieced together the events with the help of physical evidence. A broken glass on the floor, Amara's fingerprints on the railing, and Khalid's incriminating phone records. In the end, Khalid's charisma couldn't save him from the weight of the truth. As the investigation deepened, his web of lies unraveled, exposing the toxic, manipulative man behind the charming facade. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the pale glow of a monitor that beeped faintly beside Amara's bed. Fatima sat in the corner, her hands clasped tightly, silent prayers escaping her trembling lips. The sterile air felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. A doctor entered, his expression solemn, carrying the gravity of what was to come. He glanced at Fatima before turning to Laila, who stood near the window, her back stiff and unyielding. "I'm afraid her condition has deteriorated," the doctor said softly. "We did everything we could, but—" He paused, as though searching for gentler words that didn't exist. "She passed a few moments ago." Fatima let out a guttural cry, her body folding as if struck by an unseen force. Laila closed her eyes tightly, willing herself not to crumble. "She was so young," Fatima whispered through her tears. "She didn't deserve this." Outside the hospital, the city buzzed with the news of Amara's death. Headlines exploded across social media and news channels. "Tragic end to a scandalous affair," and "Young woman dies in high-profile scandal." Her story, now public fodder, painted her as both victim and cautionary tale, her name forever etched in whispers of betrayal and love gone horribly wrong. The arrest came swiftly, though not unexpectedly. Khalid was escorted from his penthouse in handcuffs, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the harsh reality of his situation. Flashing cameras and shouted questions followed him, capturing his stoic expression. At the station, Khalid leaned back in the interrogation chair, a faint smirk curling his lips. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said calmly, addressing the detective across the table. Detective Rami folded his arms. "You can spin your stories all you want, Mr. Al-Farouq, but the evidence is piling up, and your charm won't save you here." Khalid's gaze hardened. "I have no intention of lying, Detective. This was an accident. Tragic, yes, but an accident nonetheless." Behind the scenes, his legal team worked tirelessly, crafting a narrative that painted him as a grieving man caught in unfortunate circumstances. Articles were planted, interviews carefully curated. The media began to question, could Khalid Al-Farouq be a victim of circumstance? But cracks in his facade began to show. Leaked texts, inconsistent statements, and whispers from his inner circle hinted at a more sinister truth. Laila stepped into the courtroom, her head held high, despite the storm of emotions raging within her. She had spent years in Khalid's shadow, enduring his infidelities and manipulations, but today was different. Today, she would reclaim her voice. The judge glanced over the papers before looking at her. "You're seeking divorce on grounds of emotional abuse and infidelity?" "Yes," Laila said firmly, her voice steady. "For years I was silenced by fear of shame, of judgment, of retaliation, but I can't stay silent anymore." Reporters outside the courthouse eagerly scribbled notes as Laila emerged, her statement becoming a rallying cry for women trapped in similar situations. "I won't be a victim of his lies any longer," she declared to the sea of microphones. Her story resonated, sparking sympathy and admiration. For the first time, The world saw her not as Khalid's wife, but as a woman who refused to be broken. Fatima sat in the witness box, her hands gripping the wooden edge for support. The courtroom was silent, every eye on her. "Tell us what you saw that night," the prosecutor urged gently. Fatima's voice wavered but did not falter. "I came home and found Amara on the floor, barely breathing. Khalid was there and he refused to call for help. He cared more about protecting himself than saving her." Khalid's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection! Speculation!" "Sustained," the judge said. Fatima took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I am telling the truth. Khalid's lies are why Amara is dead." Her testimony was raw, emotional, and unflinching, painting a vivid picture of the manipulation and betrayal Amara had endured. The jury leaned in, their faces grim, as Fatma's words struck a chord that no legal strategy could undo. The case ignited a firestorm of discussion across the nation. News panels dissected every detail, while activists took to the streets, demanding justice for Amara. "This isn't just about one woman," an activist declared during a televised rally. "It's about the power imbalances that allow men like Khalid Al-Farouq to exploit and discard women without consequence." Khalid's empire began to crumble. His name, once synonymous with power and privilege, became a cautionary tale. Lawsuits piled up, businesses severed ties, and his once loyal allies distanced themselves. In court, the jury's verdict was clear: guilty. Khalid's attempts to manipulate the system had failed, and justice was finally served. But the impact extended far beyond the courtroom. Women began sharing their stories, inspired by Layla and Fatima's courage. Conversations about consent, accountability, and systemic reform grew louder, challenging the deeply entrenched norms of society. As Khalid was led away in handcuffs, the world watched, knowing that while justice had been served for Amara, her story had become a catalyst for change that would echo for years to come. The room was silent except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan spinning lazily against the warm evening air. The narrator's voice broke through the stillness, laced with both sorrow and urgency. "Tarma ta plasma kat el," he said. Amara Al-Salim wasn't born into privilege. She wasn't groomed for a life of opulence or power. What she craved was simpler: love, belonging, validation. For a girl raised on the outskirts of wealth, glimpses into a world of luxury felt like a fairy tale. But fairy tales, the voice paused, heavy with meaning, often come with a price. Amara's journals, later recovered by her roommate Fatma, painted a portrait of a young woman desperate to be seen. Her words, inked in the looping cursive of someone still searching for herself, revealed her vulnerability. "When Khalid looks at me," one entry read, "it's like he sees everything I want to be, everything I could be. I can't let him slip away." The narrator sighed. But love, built on a foundation of illusions and unspoken lies, is a fragile thing, doomed to collapse under the weight of reality. Amara's longing blinded her to the cracks in Khalid's polished exterior. Where she saw passion, he saw opportunity. Where she saw love, he saw control. "Affairs are whispered about in dark corners, condemned in the light of day," the narrator continued. "But what society often fails to address is the emotional void that makes such entanglements possible." Amara's relationship with Khalid was more than a secret. It was a lifeline she clung to in a world that had often made her feel invisible. He offered her more than material gifts. He gave her fleeting moments where she believed she mattered. But the price of forbidden love is steep. Her affair with Khalid didn't just shatter trust, the narrator said, their tone sharpening. It pulled her into a web of deceit, where she became both pawn and collateral damage. The camera pans over a photograph of Amara, her face framed by soft curls, her smile radiant but tinged with a sadness that hindsight makes glaringly obvious. Khalid Al-Farouq's wealth wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon, the narrator continued, their voice now laced with bitterness. In a world where money speaks louder than morality, Khalid's power allowed him to rewrite the narrative of that fateful night. Footage of Khalid's pristine penthouse, his fleet of luxury cars, and his high-prefix lawyers flashes across the screen. While Amara's name became fodder for tabloids, Khalid's connections worked overtime to recast him as the victim of a tragic misunderstanding. The narrator's voice softened, but the edge of frustration remained. It raises the question, how often does the truth lose when it goes up against wealth and influence? The scene shifts to Khalid's sentencing day. Reporters swarm outside the courthouse, their voices clamoring to capture the moment. The narrator's voice resumes, tinged with a quiet rage. Khalid Al-Farouq was convicted, but not for the crime that truly mattered. Lesser charges ensured he would serve time, but his name, his legacy, remained tarnished, not obliterated. And that, the voice wavered, is the bitter truth of a flawed system. A quick montage of interviews follows. Activists calling for reform, legal analysts dissecting the case, and Fatma speaking passionately at a rally. But the question remains. The narrator said, the camera focusing on an empty chair in a dimly lit room. Was justice served? Or was it another hollow victory? Another reminder of who truly holds the power. The final scene is a quiet one. A candlelight vigil for Amara, with dozens gathered, their faces illuminated by flickering flames. The camera lingers on a makeshift memorial. A collage of photographs, flowers, and notes addressed to a young woman gone too soon. Amara's death became more than a tragedy. It became a movement, the narrator said. Her story inspired women to speak out, to demand change, to challenge the structures that allowed her to be silenced. The screen fades to black, the sound of the vigil's voices rising in unison. Her legacy, the narrator concluded, is not just a cautionary tale, but a call to action. Because silence is complicity, and justice must be more than a word, it must be a promise.